So does the student section have an effect on the game being played?
I would like to think it does. I think our vibes and good energy coming out feeds the players, and the players use it as fuel to stay intense and attack the football.
All right. How do you think the student section brings the school together, like as a whole?
I think through our chants, and it's kind of like everyone's doing the same thing, and we all have one goal, and that's just to be the craziest student section, to be really loud. And the parents like it, but the players obviously like it, and we like it. So.
Do you think the student section makes people want to go to the games and like want to be there?
Yeah, I think because not everyone understands football like some others do, so they would go just to see their friends or whatever and chant if they have fun doing that. And of course, the vibe's good, so it's like a social event, and I think a lot of people like that.
Yeah. What would you say is your favorite memory from the student section, and what game was that at?
I would have to say the Cedar Park game, which the score ended up being 23-0, or was it 23-0? And you'd think that would be kind of a boring game just because it's a blowout, but the fact that it was Cedar Park and we haven't beat them in, I don't know, like 20 odd years, so everyone was going crazy every touchdown, even the players jumping up and down. I think that was a great vibe. I think that's one of the student section's most influential games.
I think I'd have to agree. All right, that's all the questions. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you, Connor.
Pick him up, dude! Right there!
This is Miss Watts. She's the Spring Springs High School swim coach, and we're going to ask her some questions regarding our documentary. The first one is, what kind of revenue do you think the sports bring into the school?
Sports in general can bring in a lot of money. There's a lot of different people that like a lot of different sports. So if it's football, basketball, even swimming, when we start hosting meets, it'll bring in a variety of people, and I think it'll bring in quite a bit of money with the sales from concessions and if they have programs and things like that.
Alrighty. What impact do you think that sports have on the athletes themselves, grade-wise?
Grade-wise?
Grade-wise.
Just strictly grades. I think that being an athlete, you're held to a higher standard, so your grades definitely can affect it's your performance. So if your performance in the classroom is poor, then your grades are going to suffer, but since athletes are held to that higher standard, then their grades should be where they need to be, and it should be high, and getting everything done they need to get done.
Alright. Do you think that pep rallies increase school spirit?
Yeah, I think pep rallies, when everyone's on board and there's people supporting each other at the pep rallies, it not only shows what accomplishments that they've had in the past, but it also helps, like say if the basketball team's in a pep rally and they're going to districts, it not only pumps everybody up and wants people to go to that basketball game, it'll also help the basketball players get pumped up for that game.
All right. What do you think the impact sports has just on the students themselves? Like not anything specific, but just their everyday life.
For every single sport, no matter what it is, there's a physical and a mental aspect to that. And I think that people that don't get those sports, they might get it in other UIL competitions, but if it is a rigorous sport, then I think that there's a lot of potential that those student athletes learn.
Do you think sports create young adults that are ready to go off to college and start a life possibly?
It helps mold those athletes to make a career out of it, right? So with the dedication and determination and the time management, getting to practice on time, making sure they get all of their studies done on top of making practice and trying 100% at each practice, and then making the games. I think that it definitely helps in overall life skills that are needed to make great academic people in careers.
And last question is, how important do you think sports are to this school?
I think sports are extremely important in this school. There's a lot of people here that might feel lost if they didn't have those sports. A lot of student athletes and people in general. There's a lot of adults that still are in sports because it gives them a purpose, right? And with that purpose, they can excel in their other classes because they find that drive and determination, and then they just keep going on. So I think that it's crucial to our environment and our school.
All right, well, that's all the questions we have for you today, so thank you for taking the time to
Thank you, Ms. Watts.
interview with us.
Hi, I'm with Kevin, a writer for the 4-Star Telegram up in Fort Worth. And yeah, the first question is, how have high school sports changed in the last 20 years you've been working for the 4-Star Telegram?
Well, it's changed demonstrably in a couple of different ways, but for the most part, high school athletics is still the same. It's still the same thing that it was at its core, which is raw competition. And obviously all the cliches that you hear all the time, good team building exercises, a way for young men to grow, and young women now to grow into team sports and become part of a team and an organization. And in competition, the raw competition part of being successful and winning, learning how to win, none of that's really changed. It's all roughly the same as it was, 20, 30 years ago. But I'd say the biggest change from the question that you're asking is more along the lines of what we talked about earlier, which was girls being involved in sports now more so. That is a standard that is much higher than it was previously, and now you've got the opportunities there for girls, young women, that wasn't there before. And when you factor all of those things in, and you factor in the opportunities to play in college and at the next level, high school sports hasn't changed all that much. That's all still the same thing, but now it's much more so. It's there's more opportunity than there was in the past.
Alrighty. Do you see any differences in high school sports as you travel around Texas, maybe to different regions where they have different customs, you call it?
Yeah, absolutely. As communities go, I think there's differences in everything. I think in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there's a big difference in the various sports when you're talking about football, basketball, baseball, and on into the other Olympic sports. When it comes to the Dallas area, the Houston area, the San Antonio area, the Austin area, there's just a different vibe between all of them. It's still the same thing from the standpoint of the goal is to win and win state titles, but I think everybody approaches it a little bit differently. I think in the Dallas area, it's highly competitive. I still think it's highly political too, but I still think it's just as highly competitive as it is anywhere else. I think it can be a little serious sometimes, but for the most part, it's still sports and high school sports is still something that is what binds communities together. And honestly, I'll tell you, more so down in the South Texas area, it may be more so from something that, from a community-driven standpoint, is a much bigger deal in the southern parts of the states than maybe it is in the northern part. From the standpoint that there's a lot to do in the Dallas area where maybe there's not as much to do in the South Texas area or Central Texas, from the standpoint of having the Cowboys, having the Rangers, having the Mavericks, and having the Stars, having those opportunities to see the game at a professional level. Whereas they do have that in Houston, they do have that in San Antonio, and some in Austin. But I think with as much as you have in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I think there's a lot of competition when it comes to high school sports, whether you want to spend your dollar to go to a high school game or go to a pro game. I think that's something that the high schools, have to compete with. But from the standpoint of community-driven, or the sports being a community driver, I think that it doesn't get much better for a lot of towns and a lot of small towns than it does in high school athletics.
All right, and in talking about the communities, do you think sports bring more to communities that have the sports and high schools that have a lot of sporting events? Do you think that brings more to the communities than, say, just a school that doesn't have extracurriculars?
Yeah, certainly. High school sports, they're here to stay, and whether it remains in the same avenue or vehicle that it is today, or whether it goes into, what I term a lot of my friends and a lot of my colleagues, whether it turns into the private sector where it becomes more business oriented, it's here to stay. The opportunities that are there at the next level from the college standpoint, we talked about that earlier, is you've got so many opportunities there to pay for your education, and that is here to stay as well. It is evolving. If you look at college football now to what it was 20 years ago, it's entirely different. And with the most recent court cases at that level as well, with the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit and whatnot against the NCAA, and there's an opportunity now for college athletes to be paid for actually playing. Now we're talking about college football at a much bigger level when it comes to business, and we're talking about a $6-7 billion business right now. So when you talk about a trickle down effect, is there a trickle down effect that happens in that same realm? Yes, there is, and I think you'll see that in high schools as well. When it comes to high school athletics and it comes to community, that's what high school athletics is about. It's about your community. It's about Dripping Springs. It's about Round Rock. It's about Grand Prairie High School. It's about Aledo. It's about the towns and the community and what drives the feeling of their town, let's say. Winning a state title is a big thing. Being a part of something that where you have an opportunity to play at that kind of level or at a high level, it's a big thing. Go to any high school football game on a Friday night, and you're going to see hundreds to thousands of people at these games, and it's usually hometown type atmosphere. So there's a lot of moms and dads, but there's a lot of folks that just live in that town and just want to be around to support the local team and be a part of what goes on, on a Friday night.
Mm. And with that, you say the hometown environment and the atmosphere. Do you think when people 20 years down the line just kind of come back to where they were 20 years before that, just like coming to those sporting events and not playing in them necessarily or attending them as a high schooler, but attending them with maybe a family and a job?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors there. I think that's what you do post graduation from high school and moving on into college is one thing. Once you do decide that you want to have a family, you want to move into a community, that's one of the main things that is a driving force behind families is getting them situated into a community, getting your children situated into a community where you can be in a part of something. And whether that's the band or whether that's the debate team or whether that's theater, whatever extracurricular activity it is, it's about being a part of the town, it's about being a part of the community and being a part of something that your children can excel at. When it comes to sports, like I said before, it's competitive. But that's one of the great things about if you're in the right town, if you're in the right situation, you have the right coaching, you're in an opportunity that you can be around something great and you can be around something that will help you become the kind of person that you want to be.
All right, Kevin. Well, thanks for taking the time to answer these questions, and I look forward to talking to you more about this later.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, I'm with Clint Shields, the voice of the Tigers at KDRP in Dripping Springs, Texas. For our first question will be, as the voice of the Tigers, what do you see sports brings to the school?
What it brings to the school, and this is something that I have run across over 20 years as a broadcaster in small communities primarily, is a sense of community, a sense of togetherness. I know here in Dripping Springs specifically, having watched the program over the last 6 to 10 years, it's a small enough community, even though it's in the shadow of a metroplex area like Austin, where you've got a good mix of student body following, as well as folks who are just fans of the game, whether it's football, whether it's basketball, whether it's baseball. They're a fan of the game, they're a fan of the school, and they're a fan of the kids. That's been the biggest takeaway for me, both as a youth playing and then as a broadcaster, like I said, in smaller communities. Seeing how it becomes a focal point, football for example, it becomes a destination for people on Friday nights, knowing that at 7 o'clock on Friday night, we've got a home game, we're going to be at the stadium, that's where we're going to be. Good times and bad times, and typically that's predicated by wins and losses. Smaller communities that really come together to support their high school athletics, even in the down times when the wins aren't there, they come together. And I've seen it many times in many smaller schools, and have been in plenty of places as a broadcaster in bigger cities, inner city schools, where they really, outside of the parents of the players or the parents of the kids in the band, there really was not much of a crowd, really not much crowd support. The folks within that community, I think, didn't necessarily feel attached to the kids or attached to the school, and it lacked that kind of focalized, that focused community support that I've seen in Dripping Springs over the last 10 years that we've lived here.
And when you say community, do you mean the students or Dripping Springs as a whole?
I mean both. It starts certainly with students. Dripping Springs has had increasingly good support from my view from the students over the last couple of years. Have really seen it begin to pick up. Not that it wasn't there, but I've seen it begin to grow a little bit more, whether or not that's attributable to wins and losses or whether or not that's attributable to the advance of technology and social media and kids being able to take a photo with their phone at a ball game and put it on Twitter, or shoot a Vine video, or the latest thing, Periscope, being able to broadcast something live from a place where you are. It's become kind of a gathering point per se for kids to show up at a ball game, lend their support, and make a memory out of it, something that they can talk about the next day or on Monday when they get back to school. And then at the same time, as I mentioned a minute ago, you see plenty of folks in the stands at all sporting events in Dripping Springs that are people within the community, business people within the community. Some may have kids that go to school here. Some may have kids that have already graduated from here. Some may be folks who went to school here themselves and either moved away and had a career and a family and then came here to retire, or even went and got an education and brought their family back here and raised their kids here. And they understand the importance of what it was to them when they went to school here, and obviously the importance of what it is to the current kids who play sports or are involved in athletics here in Dripping Springs, and they come out and they lend their support. And I've really been impressed over the course of my time on the radio and just our time living here, and how that, I think I've seen that grow over the last 10 years. As the school system has grown, the numbers have come in, new families with young kids who grow up wanting to be involved, wanting to put on the maroon and gold, whether it's a Friday night or a Tuesday night in the gym or what it may be. I've seen it grow over the last 10 years. So yeah, it's certainly student involved, but it's also just, it filters down to within the community, and I think you really start to kind of sense that late in the summer when the school year is ready to start. You can kind of feel a buzz within the community, and that support begins to really grow.
All right, well, thanks for taking the time to answer these questions. Do appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you again.
All right, my pleasure.